My name is Vivien Deparday, and I work at the World Bank at the GFDRR unit, the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. And so I will be talking about a section of the guidelines around the citizens' participation and crowdsourcing that was actually written by my colleague Robert Sodden. And so, as I think was mentioned in the introductory talk, we all know the key role of data, and also more importantly, the key role of stakeholder users of the data and the trust in the data within the overall disaster risk assessment process. And I think citizen participation and crowdsourcing really represent a great opportunities in the disaster risk assessment process to improve the engagement with stakeholders, trust in data, and better use of the data, and overall help with the data aspects of a disaster risk assessment that's very challenging. So, I mean, often in the traditional data collection, we've been historically just kind of contracting a large consulting group to go and collect specific data, but that approach is a bit of more of a one-off approach to fit into a specific risk assessment, and can be quite expensive and also a bit more external and not as much embedded in the whole process of the disaster risk assessment. So one thing our team and other team have been experimenting with, and for the last maybe 5 years, so I guess it's not so much an experiment anymore, but it's actually quite proven and successful, is to work around with approaches around crowdsourcing, also called citizen science or participatory mapping. And the idea is that by involving local communities, local technical universities, and local institutions, you can really get also participants in the data collection to learn, first to learn more about the risk. So you also have a risk communication aspect, and you can do outreach and sensitization while collecting the data, but also it enables involving more people in the risk assessment process and making it more inclusive. And I think there's another section of the overall guidelines around marginalized population, but that can be one way of involving them more in the risk assessment. And also, finally, it will improve the overall output by being able to integrate local knowledge and make the whole process more sustainable and transparent and reusable. And so basically what we're trying to do here is to work locally to get the best, the most up-to-date local and information. So that can be done using various techniques. That can be using GPS or paper maps or community workshops, and there's quite a few ways of doing that. And historically, there's quite a bit of literature on participatory mapping and community mapping. And one new platform that enabled a lot of this work to scale up is OpenStreetMap. So for those who don't know OpenStreetMap, kind of a way of putting it quickly is, if you think of Wikipedia, it's the same as Wikipedia in the concept, but the goal is, instead of creating an encyclopedia of the world, is to create a map of the world. So anyone can go and create an account, become a user, and contribute data to OpenStreetMap and create this free map of the world collaboratively with any member of the public, private organization, public organization. Everyone is working together to create a free public map of the world, and that is open too, so the data can be downloaded and reused for many applications. And so how does it work, and how has it been used? So one thing that can be done is satellite imagery is made available to people, so people can use it to trace roads and building infrastructure and other infrastructure, and actually events like you can see in the picture here that we call some mapathons are organized to be able to quickly map some areas, and that can be done remotely or locally, either way. And once the image is traced, you can start creating the base map with some of the infrastructure. Here we can see some of the schools, banks, parks, and Buddhist temple, and other church, and so on. So that's one way of leveraging OpenStreetMap platform. And then after that, once you do this kind of remote work, you can go locally with work with the different community to really digitize the local knowledge. So here we have pictures from different places from Kathmandu, where we worked with engineering students to map schools and health infrastructure, to Vietnam, where using some of the motorbikes and bicycles, be able to map all the road infrastructure, as well as in Malawi and other places to map some of the local community infrastructure. So this is kind of the second part of the process. After using the satellite imagery, you go on the ground with papers, phones, GPS to really collect all this information and put it online to share it. And so this is an example in Kathmandu where we work for disaster, for seismic risk assessment, where all the educational facilities as well as facilities were collected throughout the Kathmandu Valley, and not only their location, but as well their characteristics, so 20 to 25 building characteristics for each of those structures. And I think it was overall 100,000 building, and including 2,500 like schools and around 400 health facilities that were mapped using this approach, working with the students and local government and kind of mapping enthusiasts, and also with science organizations such as NSET, who help design the manual to be able to map those buildings so that the data could be scientifically sound and usable by the scientists for the risk assessment. Another example is ongoing now in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, where there's a lot of flooding area, and the base map was done here, a bit similar to the same process as in Kathmandu, but here one of the next steps is actually to map some of the flood-prone areas, so and some of the drainage. So here you can see a community workshop where people are identifying where it usually floods based on the last 2 floods they experienced, and on the right you can see a student working on actually collecting information about the drainage infrastructure, and so here getting a bit more maybe what we call into citizen science, where they do measurement of different drainage infrastructure as well as transect works and so on to map flood-prone areas and drainage infrastructure. And there's a video here about the initiative that I won't click on now, but it is there for future reference. So here is an output of the work. You can see all the base map with on top of it the flood prone areas as identified by the participant on the left, and on the right is the flood prone areas as identified using hydraulic modeling, but using the drainage infrastructure collected by participatory mapping. So here are 2 examples of output, kind of beyond just the base map, but some of the drainage and how it's used, and some of the flood prone areas. And so a lot of this work is kind of a good way of collecting data, but I think what is really important is all the side effects of this approach to collecting data, and especially the capacity that is built over time. And this is example from all around the world, and this then are getting organized in local communities in various countries, and regionally and globally, then exchange experience and mobilize volunteer, or also just get paid to organize citizen science and community mapping initiatives. And one example is in Kathmandu, where following the work we had done there, a local organization formed called Kathmandu Living Labs, who is then now working with many organizations to work with mapping and citizen science. And they were very active also just after the earthquake, and in mobilizing remote volunteer and international volunteer to create the map very, very fast, as well as locally collecting more data. And so I think it's a very good example of how one data collection can really snowball and sprout in many other initiatives and create really local engagement and local capacity. And yeah, here are some of the resources. I didn't really talk too much on how and what are the things to plan a project like that, but a lot of this is detailed in some of these resources, and especially in the first one here, the guide to open cities mapping has a lot of the more practical and how to do that. So yeah, I think that's it from me.